Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Welcome, Alexandria Bergman, back to the Autism ADHD podcast.
Hi, Holly. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So good. So I'm going to introduce you really quick. You are a master IEP coach who has built on your skills as a former teacher and a parent of 3 differently wired children. Your mission is to support neurodivergent families and set up collaborative systems with schools and professionals. And thank goodness for you.
Oh, thank you.
Today, we're going to talk about 10 school tips for teachers and parents. And what's so great about these tips is they are often the ones that we give most often. You as a person that supports neurodivergent families, and me as a therapist. Okay, you ready?
I'm ready.
Number 1 tip for all of you listening, Alex and I always say the child's voice first. And I don't know why I'm clapping, like I'm emphasizing this. The child's voice first. And Alex, what do you think about that? Because I find that this is sometimes, unfortunately, the last thing that happens.
Yeah, I think so many times, especially, with our kids with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, any of these different things going on, they're kind of bossed around all the time. And, then you kind of get those oppositional defiant behaviors that come along with that. So if we're respecting the child's voice and listening to them, I'm really tuning in where they're having difficulty, what's hard for them. That's also helping model those emotional regulation skills and executive functioning skills that a lot of them are lacking. So if we start that at an early age, then by the time they get to middle school and high school, it's going to be so much easier.
I agree. And it's never too late. And this really helps children, again, in an early age, self-advocate and not only listening to what they're saying, but what they're doing, because not all children will come out and say, I'm really feeling like math worksheets are difficult for me, especially those word problems, right? So sometimes we're not going to hear that come out, and we might need to look individually at each child and how they communicate best. And sometimes what I'll do about helping a child express their needs is using a simple fill-in, writing it on the digital whiteboard if I'm doing telehealth with a child or in person, for instance. The one thing I wish would be different about school is, and they can orally say it, they can write it, they can do whatever. And if that doesn't work, for them, that's okay too. Another way to help them communicate that is providing some options. For instance, if I wrote down math, English, PE, whatever that is, and say, circle the ones that are easiest for you, or circle the ones that, are hardest for you, whatever that is. And again, always bringing that child's needs first. If they aren't using their words to communicate their needs, they're often using their behavior. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But of course, that child's voice is always number 1. Number 1, always. Can I get an amen, Alex?
Amen. But I actually have a really quick, funny story about, I think it's so common, parents have been doing these about me sheets, that you find on Pinterest or that one of their providers gives to them. And my son saw it before I sent it to his teacher last week. And he's like, no, some of that stuff's wrong. And so that's where I'm like, oh, as parents, we really should be getting our child's input on these and making sure that they are accurate, on what their favorite things right now are, because that can change.
I love that. And so Most of you also know that I released my Get to Know Your Child form last week, and it will be available in the show notes. It's a one-page snapshot, easy PDF for you to fill in, takes less than 5 minutes. So you want to make sure you go and get that form in the show notes. It is, in my opinion, the best one out there, just saying. Okay, number 2, as much as possible, include the child's interest in their learning. What do you think about that, Alex?
Oh, absolutely. Especially for these kids that don't like writing or have a hard time with writing. It's just not worth the struggle to make them write on the same topic that every other second grader is writing on, right? If they want to write about Pokemon, let them write about Pokemon. You can still assess the standards in the same way, even with some adaptations to the original assignment.
I love that. And just a really great reminder is that's not taking them away from the curriculum. It's not saying that now we can no longer assess them. It's being creative and flexible and understanding that for this child, it's not the same for them to be given this topic.
Correct. And I think a lot of times I hear, for these early elementary kids, like, oh, well, we can't, let them start doing that. Then by the time they get to high school, then they're going to want all these changes. And it's like, no, just when we're learning a new skill, right? Like if you give these adaptations early on, then they'll get better at the skill, and then it won't be so hard for them that they need all that flexibility. So while we're still learning those lagging skills, it's okay to push back on that misconception.
And we know that differently wired kids are really into their interests, right? So, it's not the same as providing a topic to a neurotypical child who might be able to shift and use perspective taking easier, all these other things we need to think about. So not only are we going to see that child shine when they talk about their interests, when they write about their interests, or they draw about their interest, they can feel proud because this is their thing. This is the thing that they can feel really good at. And we have to remember that part. So definitely include their interest in any possible way. I always do this in therapy with my patients. Something my oldest child's therapist did the other day, which I absolutely loved, is his therapist told him to please go ahead and write rap lyrics having to do with his most common things that upset him. And he's really into writing rap lyrics. So this is a perfect assignment for him in therapy. But again, we can use this in so many ways and again, make academic work more doable. And also, I would say we'd have a better idea of seeing how this child writes or how this child communicates and really get a better assessment of their knowledge. What do you think?
Absolutely. And it's modeling that flexibility. I mean, I hear so many times from teachers that the child's being too rigid, but what is being modeled in the classroom if they're not providing any flexibility to these children? That's what they're seeing, and then they're mimicking that rigidness. So,
right. And I think teachers, often feel like they're stuck. It has to be this way, and this is the curriculum. And so many teachers that I know are so creative and really feeling that they have permission to do that. But that's such a great thing to consider when you're looking at academics. Number 3, as a behavior expert, I'm going to be all about number 3. Don't assume that challenging behavior is on purpose. So, another amen here, girl.
Amen.
Amen to this. When we see disruptive behavior, challenging behavior, whatever you want to say, something that we find that not appropriate to the situation, we, as whether you're a teacher, a parent, a therapist, we're going to feel some kind of physiological reaction to that, right? We're human. That is going to happen. If a child throws something or they curse or whatever, you're going to have some sort of internal reaction. And what we need to do is, before we say or do anything, check in with ourselves. Before we say or do anything, before we punish, before we assume that they're trying to be difficult or make the day hard for us, it really is not that. As much as it feels like it, as much as it may look like it, I can guarantee you, I have been working in child behavior for 22 years. It is not that. It is always something else. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Again, this is something I'm so passionate about, and, shifting the language that both parents and teachers use, right? These kids aren't bad kids. They might have a bad or poor choice behavior, but, the good kid, bad kid kind of mindset needs to shift and change. I've loved you've posted about getting rid of the clip charts in the classrooms. Um, and all the other there's so many great new practices. And I love how you mentioned the physiology of stuff, looking at the polyvagal theory and, knowing that if we as adults, with great coping skills are feeling triggered, then how are these kids that are lacking those skills feeling? And I can remember being in a classroom, of 35 kids. I can't see everything going on. And so many times our classrooms are so much more fast paced now with all the curriculum that needs to be covered that, there's not a lot of time in the day to, be a detective, but that's absolutely necessary. Um, and working together as a team between everyone in the child's lives to figure out, why these behaviors are happening. And then instead of suppressing them and, pushing them down, it's just going to escalate and get uglier and uglier. We want to really look at that root cause and give them the tools they need.
Beautifully said. And when you think of behavior this way, it changes everything. Absolutely everything. It's no longer this child is trying to make my life difficult or trying to disrupt the class. It's what do they need? What's happening? There is a gap here somewhere. What is going on exactly? Is this too hard? Is it too easy? Is it too boring? Are the lights flickering? Is there a smell? Is there too much distraction? Do they have something playing in their head? Do they need to move? Are they hangry? Okay, we all get hangry. Is there something we are missing? Are we seeing that medication's coming out of their system at this time? Was there a difficult peer interaction that we didn't see? Sometimes that has occurred with my oldest son who's in high school, that a teacher, of course, they're so busy, they're teaching their class and they can't, like you said, be tuned into every single thing every child's saying to every other child. In that second, it wouldn't be possible, right? So I remember some kind of his challenges were built on someone calling him the R word, which I think my head about exploded off my neck when I found that out. So it looked like it came, it was just disruptive behavior, but it turns out it was a very big reaction to being called a name that was absolutely not okay to call my kid. So again, we assumed that he was being disruptive on purpose, but really it ended up he was called a name by another student that was very upsetting to him. So see how we have to look at all the angles of this, because if we assume that this challenging behavior, disruptive behavior is on purpose, we will get it wrong every single time. We will not support them in the way they need every single time.
And Holly, I love you just mentioned, that validation of feelings. I think so many times these kids, they're not having their feelings validated, right? Like so many adults, so many parents, the teachers in their lives, sometimes even the therapists in their life, may not understand a neurodivergent mind and how they are experiencing the world. And so, like my son had an incident last week in the first week of school already, where the teacher put his full legal first name up on the board for her groups. And so a child in the group asked him what his name was, and he didn't want to say his nickname because then she would say, "You're not my group," because it didn't match the name on the board. And so, but it was so cute that, before he would get in the car and something I could tell would be bothering him, and he wouldn't be able to tell me about it. But he took notes in his notes app of his phone and had the incident all spelled out that he was able to recreate it for me.
Wow, that's fantastic.
A huge, huge growth for him. So
good for him. I love that kid. So number 4, does everyone who has contact with the child know their needs and accommodations? So we need to be careful about this because we certainly want to respect that child's privacy. But at the same time, if an adult or school personnel does not know, they will make assumption themselves because we're humans. We make assumptions, right? So let's talk about some examples that will come into play. One of them, Alex, that I find is that if one of my patients has an accommodation where the hallway is just a sensory nightmare for them, they really need to leave class a few minutes early to transition, and getting yelled at and being in the hallway when they're not supposed to be. And again, that teacher doesn't know, that teacher doesn't understand that they're not only they're supposed to be there, they're doing exactly what they need to be able to support themselves. And then some kids don't have the communication to say, actually, I am supposed to be going down the hallway right now. That's in my IEP. So what are your thoughts about that one?
no, absolutely. I mean, that's a great one, especially, when you get into larger settings, as they grow into middle school and high school, where every teacher isn't going to know your child and so forth. But so, empowering them to have a statement to say, this is an accommodation I have, you can speak to, and, I think it's really important for every child to know who their support personnel are, who their resource teacher is, or the speech therapist, or the occupational therapist, whoever have their main go-to person that they really have a great relationship with. I think it's important, if you have any questions, you can ask Miss So-and-so. And just having that, can kind of deflect a lot of reactions from teachers who are trying to patrol the hallways. But also these come into effect, in the cafeteria. I can remember my son, in like 3rd grade, holding up the cafeteria line. And as I did some investigating, the cafeteria lady had no idea that he had an IEP or that he had any diagnosis or anything that, would cause him to freeze and get anxiety that the line's building up. And then here's this lady yelling at him that he's not going fast enough. And, another common phrase I hear a lot is like, but they're capable of it. They've done it for the last 3 months and never had any problems. But it's like they might not see all the different things that built up, at home the night before, or if they didn't get a good night's sleep, or they got some bad news about a family member. Every child is not going to perform the exact same way every single day of their life.
Me neither.
Exactly. So that's, making sure that anyone who comes into contact, and then also, back to that, kind of our about me with the child, does the child know who the principals are, who the assistant principal is, who the counselor is? Do they know those different faces in the building? I use my kids as examples a lot, but, my son had a social worker, and she was the most well-dressed person I've ever seen in a school building. And I loved her, but she was really eclectic, and she would change her glasses every single day, or her hairstyle. So my son wasn't recognizing her. And, she would think, well, he knows who I am. And it's like, no, you just corrected him and he thought you were some stranger. So.
And we do know face recognition and research is different.
Yes.
For differently wired children too. So again, just another thing to consider in understanding. The bus driver, like you said, the cafeteria worker, some other teachers in the school. And again, that balance of wanting to protect them and what they feel comfortable disclosing and what feels comfortable to the parents, but also, how can we let people know what this child needs? Because if there's a miscommunication, if they feel like the child isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing, even though they are, that can definitely create stress.
Well, I think so many parents assume this is just being done at the school level, and they don't realize, I've been on cases where, the art teacher, the music teacher, the PE teacher, their daily specials don't even realize the child has an IEP or a 504. Or what about our kids that have a medical diagnosis but don't qualify for an IEP or 504? It's absolutely okay to still make an all about me sheet for these kids, and disclosing what the family feels comfortable with disclosing is going to help those school staff tremendously.
Yes, yes, yes. Number 5, don't assume another assume. Don't assume need based on a label or a diagnosis. And you and I agree, we have worked with so many different kids. We both have differently wired kids ourselves, some with very similar diagnoses, but they're very, very different. Would you agree?
Yes. And again, I see schools doing this. I see parents doing it too. Parents asking, what are all the accommodations my child needs for middle school for his ADHD, right? And every child with ADHD is going to look so different. That's what executive functioning skill are they struggling with? Or, is it a math learning disability? Is it dyslexia? I've been really excited, in our state with all the great things that are happening surrounding dyslexia. When I moved here, I was told at the IEP table that we couldn't mention dyslexia. That wasn't a thing for schools. So now that it's in state policy and, there are big shifts that have been happening, that's exciting. So, again, is an autistic child having behaviors because they're dyslexic too? And that may, parents might have thought I have the medical label of autism, I don't need to tease anything else out. And
Right.
that's where
We're talking about learning disabilities, right? A lot of kids go without a learning disability being identified at all.
Correct.
And so again, what does that child need? It really comes down to that individual child, always. So we want to make sure that we don't think, oh, if they have autism, then they need this schedule. Or if they have ADHD, they need this. Well, really, there is some truth to that because they are fitting in that kind of checklist in the DSM. But at the same time, just if anything, assume every child will be different. They are an individual like anyone else. They have their likes, they have their struggles, and really approaching it that way is the best way to go.
And that's why it's called an individualized education plan, right? I see so
Drop the mic.
many plans that are just cookie cutter and not designed with the child's needs, which I think we'll get into further down on your list with progress monitoring and collecting the correct data.
Definitely. Okay. And so again, we want to say that teacher education is so important. Teachers, again, we've just got, I can't imagine being on it constantly for so many kids every second. Like a teacher's job is incredibly difficult. So on top of all that, though, providing additional training on not only, again, what is autism and what does that look like, or what is ADHD and what are things we need to consider in those trainings, really thinking about what to look at, what to ask, what to notice, I think is almost even more important.
And I will say that's the most overlooked area of the IEP, and everybody can pull out their IEP right now and look at that if they have one, is after the accommodation section, there is a section for supports needed for school staff. And that's where there absolutely can be training specific to the child's needs for the people that are in contact with the child.
Oh, so good. Okay. All right. So here we go. Number 6, don't assume that everyone has the information, all the information, right? So what I do and set up for my kids' school, and then for my patients too, I'll do this, is how does this work best for you? Because as their therapist, I need to be in contact with their teachers. I need to be in contact with their other providers. And I need to see what else is happening. That way we can collaborate and move forward and help this child even in a more effective and efficient way. And so everyone likes to communicate in a different way. Not every team is the same, but I think we think there's so many people involved here. Everyone is probably talking to someone. The parents probably know, which they probably don't. Or the speech therapist knows, but they may not. So we need to assume that everyone is busy and that everyone does not have the information. Assume that, right?
Well, and there's all these new apps, right? I had one family that the teacher was sending them messages on Remind, and the parents didn't even know what that was. So here the teacher thought they were getting all these messages, and the parents had no idea, until it accumulated into the child being suspended. And then
That's
it
really
was
hard.
yes,
And
so
what
difficult.
great opportunity to do this as soon as possible. And it's never too late. It doesn't matter where in the school year this is happening. Does a group email work best for everyone? Or is it text or one of the apps? How often? Who's in the group? I mean, all these things need to be talked about and decided about how that child support people are going to come together and all be on the same page.
Yeah, and even setting up the consistency too, and how often. The biggest thing I have found to work as a busy parent is that I have 3 questions in a weekly email that goes out Thursday night to every teacher. And that's easy for the teacher just to hit reply and fill in. So they're not even having to give, a whole book about what's been going on. They can just ask, I ask, is my child missing any assignments? Did you notice anything that was difficult? And what should our top priority be for the weekend?
Absolutely. That is such great advice. Number 7, not only knowing their class schedule, but their support schedule as well. And, the time of this recording, we are starting this school year, but this is important no matter when, is who are their people? What is their schedule? When do they get speech therapy? Where? How does this work? Is it a group? Is it individual? I mean, there's so many things to think about that I think as parents, and Alex, I've got for those of you watching on YouTube, my mommy needs sleep. Did you see how rough this mug is? Oh, I'm going to need to get another one, but I think this just represents it. This is more information we need to know. I want to know when my child is getting their additional help for math or English, those types of things. And they need to know that.
Well, they need to know that person. I've witnessed way too many times, more than I want to count, of, an adult coming to pull a child and the child saying, I'm not going with you. Right. And here it is because they don't know who that person is and they've been taught not to go with strangers. So they're taking that very literal. And then the adults viewing it as, they're being disrespectful. They're not doing what they're told. They're being non-compliant. Again, shifting that language, and looking at that behavior. Why are they having a hard time? And so that's, if we can be showing kids pictures or a quick, one of my greatest new tools that I just found out about, I guess, is Loom. And you can make a quick 30-second video, hi, I'm, Mrs. Bergman, your child's, third grade teacher or your child's speech therapist, or, and think how the child will feel, getting that quick little message that didn't take much effort to put together. And then you can send it out to, if you have 33 kids on your caseload, we know these teachers are overburdened with their caseloads, but you can send out that same message, really easily.
And Loom, Loom, I have used it before, and it's an excellent tool. So I'll have to make sure we put that in the show notes as well. So that's such a good idea. Number 8, how will progress, and again, woohoo, data, how will progress be measured? Oftentimes, we'll look in IEPs, and in IEP, you have to have this down. How are we going to measure the school? How is this going to be measured? And a lot of times it reads like teacher observation or teacher
anecdotal notes.
Anecdotal notes, exactly. And, oftentimes, teachers, again, we've been talking about this, are so swamped. A great data sheet from a behavior person, because teachers can't represent every provider on earth. It's not possible. Nobody can do that. A behavior person who understands what it looks like, how exactly to measure it, and the most effective and efficient way is the person who should be on board with putting this together. So the teacher can take accurate data. It's going to be so fast. It's not going to take a bunch of their time. Really, that is going to be the best way to go. And we may be looking at way off information, right? There was an example where my oldest, there was a very not so great data collection system put in place where it looked like this, particular behavior that we were tracking had occurred 4 times over 2 months. And when we really dug in there, because it just did not sit well with me or right with me, it turned out that it was actually occurring at least that many times per class per day.
Oh, no.
So you can see that's a whole different ball game. Getting information that is accurate is the most important thing in so many ways. There's lots of important things, but it's one of the most important things because we cannot do well to support our children if we're not accurately getting a representation of what's happening. So we might say, oh, met that goal, let's move on, when we weren't even close to meeting that goal. And not only is that good information, we have to know why. Why are we not close? We're not doing it well. We're not supporting that child in the way they need if this is what's actually happening. So what do you think about that?
Also looking at that language of what are we taking data on, right? I helped a child yesterday that had 175 dots for disrespectful. And, what was disrespectful? What is this child struggling with? I don't know. It just needs to be very concrete, and, we need to be tracking one specific skill that they're lagging.
Right. And I honestly, if we were to poll 10 people in saying, tell us exactly what disrespect means, we're going to get 10 different answers because that is very, very vague. And again, where is this happening? What does disrespect mean in this environment? What does it mean for this child? Oftentimes it's really a social difference that we're talking about. And then again, we go back to let's not assume it's on purpose. The language in itself of disrespect just really sounds like on purpose to me. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think we both have experience with our children cursing at us. And, other parents' jaws might drop, but I don't find that disrespectful. Instead, that tunes me in. Something happened here that he's talking like this.
Yes.
I just have to flip it around and be like, hey, buddy, what did I do wrong? I make mistakes. and then usually he can go into it. But if I had escalated right there along with him and instead gotten upset or sent him to his room, or like, I want to have figured out what parents are human, we make mistakes. So, and that's absolutely okay for us to make mistakes.
Everyone does. Everyone. And again, being able, and I'm glad that you brought that up, is being very specific on what we're talking about. And again, not assuming any kind of disruptive behavior is on purpose, or this child is trying to be mean or whatever. Again, it is probably completely something else. I would say always something else from what I've done in my career, which has been a long one. Number 9, school year event plans, such as field trips, assemblies, those types of things. What do you think, Alex?
We need to be front loading kids as much as possible with these things. We can't be telling them, on Tuesday that there's going to be an assembly on Friday. And then also, what is an assembly, right? Do they know who the person coming is? These assemblies, the school paid for somebody to come in, or, it wasn't planned overnight. These things are kind of put into motion months and months ahead of time. So, starting to, set that framework for the child, that they know what to expect. What accommodations do they need? So many times they'll just think like, oh, they're doing really great now. They don't need any help, but it's like, that could be the one event that's going to send them over the deep edge and back into stress and anxiety and everything. So, I'm really another big fan with the Loom. We can put together a quick Loom video. We can do research on YouTube, maybe finding, the animal scientist that's coming, or the drummers that are coming, or whatever fun thing the school has planned. But also, I'm a really huge fan of interactive social stories. I think I work with so many parents and even teachers that say like, oh, social stories don't work. The kids find them babyish. I tried it once, it just didn't help. But if we make it interactive, where, we're putting like the GIFs in it, or the links to YouTube, or, and so easy to throw something together, on Google Docs real quick, that really personalizes it. It's not those, babyish emoji characters or the board maker symbols that our kids might be averse to. And we think, oh, well, they hated that, so I'm never going to try it again. And it might just need to be presented in a different way.
And like you said, giving them a heads up about what and when. And I think that has a lot to do with our, child's anxiety, right? Like if we're going into something, we can be flexible. We can say, okay, I'm not sure what to expect, but I know I'm going to be safe, or I'm not sure what to expect, but I'm sure it probably won't hurt my ears to the point where I want to cry. I mean, there's so many things that we could assume that would be fine. And what I find is in a lot of IEPs, this isn't even addressed. I don't often see this in my patients' IEPs or 504s, that there is any information about events.
And that absolutely, field trips and assemblies can be addressed in the IEP or in the 504. It could be extra adult support. It could just be headphones. It might just be some kind of visuals. But those are absolutely conversations that should be happening at the IEP table when an IEP is first being developed, that we take those into consideration.
So for number 10, I will also say is something that I rarely see in an IEP or 504 that needs to be in there if it's an issue, is the mealtime plan. So, many of kids that are differently wired have differences in the foods that they eat, or they may be really hungry before it's lunchtime for everyone else, or the cafeteria might be a sensory nightmare for them. I mean, there's so many things to consider, and I just don't often see this in the IEP. What is your opinion on that?
Again, it should be in the accommodation section. There's absolutely a spot for lunch. And also, for different kids that are in different settings. A lot of times I hear schools telling parents that, oh, your child's getting inclusion at lunch and at recess, but they're still, it's the 6 kids from the same self-contained class. They may be sitting at the 3rd grade table, but they're not interacting with the other 3rd graders. No one in the 3rd grade class might know their name or anything. So, really being purposeful in planning those interactions with our kids that are in a self-contained setting, and including them in that school community, and that's going to look different again for every child. There can't just be a cookie cutter inclusion plan. But so same thing, when we're thinking about lunch, and that's a skill that they could learn, going through the cafeteria line, even if they pack their lunch every time, that's, a lifelong skill they're going to need to know when they get out into the real world at some point. So are we teaching that? And what kind of accommodations do they need? So it can be addressed in goals, it can be addressed in accommodations, and it could be addressed in, my one son had a medical plan for lunch. He got pepperoni pizza every day from the school cafeteria to meet his sensory needs and to make sure he was eating and getting enough calories so that he wasn't hangry in the afternoon. So there's a lot of creative ways to think about mealtime.
I love that. And we have to think about those details, right? When we think about the IEP as well. I mean, I know we can't include everything under the sun, but we really do have to think about those details where, perhaps a child won't be able to eat their lunch because it's not warmed up, but the school has some kind of staff issue where like the kids don't have access to the microwaves or whatever. So, really thinking down to the bones of what they're going to need to be able to get what they need for their body and for their brain, I think is a really important one. So again, thanks so much, Alex, for coming back and talking with me about these 10 school tips for teachers and parents. And I know that most of our watchers and listeners are already familiar with your services, but why don't you tell us again, what is it that services that you provide and how can they find out more about you?
Yeah, so my big service right now is IEP makeovers. I go through parents, I teach them how an IEP should be built, completely backwards from what I see a lot of schools doing. I see a lot of schools building an IEP based on what services they think the child needs, and then kind of going backwards from there. So I completely flip that upside down and help parents understand how a well-created IEP should be done. And so that's kind of my busy thing right now, but I'm also, I love to collaborate, connect parents with different resources, help them understand the difference between, what happens at a school building and what happens outside in private therapies and so forth, helping them create a team that really gets their child and will make their lives easier as parents if they have all the right support personnel in their back pocket that can help them. And then, that alleviates the child's anxiety. And then hopefully, family time is a lot more happier and productive and exciting. And mom's getting the self-care that they need and so forth. So
That definitely sounds good to me. So I appreciate that support and service for school personnel and parents is absolutely much needed. You have such great experience. So thank you for that.
thank you.
And where can we tell people to find you?
I'm in the process of building my website. So I've been busy getting families prepared for back to school. So it's kind of been on a hiatus. So right now at my Facebook page for my business, just Alex J. Bergman, Master IEP Coach is the easiest place to connect.
Excellent. And I'll make sure that I have that in the show notes as well. And thank you again for joining me. And I'm sure we'll be chatting soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Holly.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for a service between Holly Blanc Moses, Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.